Hi there. Welcome to the third unit of study, Principles and Practices of Neuro-Linguistic Programming. In this unit, we focus on understanding the principles and practices of neuro-linguistic programming that we consider to be essential components for any coach to have in their skill set. As a coach, you'll be working with a wide range of clients, all of whom will need to be coached differently to gain effective results and achieve the client's desired outcome. In the early 1970s, Richard Bandler, an undergraduate student at the University of California, spent most of his time studying computer science until he was inspired to study psychology. He was fascinated by the fact that he could repeat similar personal behavior patterns of successful therapists and get similar results. Richard teamed up with John Grinder, an associate professor of linguistics who was a master at assimilating languages and most accents, plus the cultural behaviors of others. Together, they discovered a language of change. With the combination of their skills, mathematics, science, and linguistics, they observed and studied therapists such as Virginia Satir, the developer of Cogent Family Therapy, Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt psychology, and Milton Erickson, recognized as the world's foremost medical hypnotist, and known as the master of indirect hypnosis, a man who could induce a profound trance just by telling stories. Together, these two came up with the system that we now know as Neuro-Linguistic Programming, or NLP. What is Neuro-Linguistic Programming? Neuro refers to the human nervous system, including the mental pathways in our brain and our five senses. Linguistic refers to the verbal and non-verbal languages, gestures, postures, etc., with which we communicate, and programming to our ability to structure and restructure our neurological and linguistic systems to achieve desired results. Why do we study NLP? Well, there are many reasons why it's useful for coaches to have a basic understanding of NLP. If you want more information after you finish this unit, you can access training programs specifically designed to increase your knowledge and skills in this area. But basically, we study NLP in order to improve our communication with clients and develop better rapport with them more quickly. As you'll learn in later units, until clients trust you, you'll have trouble getting them to open up. Using NLP techniques is a very effective method to gain a client's trust quickly. Secondly, NLP allows us to understand how another person is thinking while you're talking to them. Using NLP techniques, which are covered in this unit, you'll be able to get on the same wavelength with your client by initially matching their communication styles and later leading them towards where you want them to go and what they need to do to reach their desired outcome. Thirdly, using NLP techniques helps you to more easily build better and more productive interpersonal relationships, not only with your clients, but with all the people in your life. Another reason to study NLP is because when you learn these techniques, you'll become and feel more confident in yourself and your ability to coach. You'll be able to set yourself clearly defined life goals and be confident in your strategy to achieve them, replace limiting beliefs and undesirable behaviors in yourself and with others, improve your ability to coach and motivate clients to achieve their goals and desires, and replicate excellence demonstrated by the people you admire the most. We show you how to do all this in this unit. There are 7 presuppositions of NLP that we'll look at in this unit. These are the basic building blocks upon which you'll base your practice as a coach. However, a word of warning. If you cannot subscribe to them, it will make it nearly impossible for you to relate well with clients and provide them with the service they need and deserve. So please consider each of these presuppositions carefully to see how well they fit with your values and belief systems. Note that there's no order to these presuppositions. That is, one does not precede the next. They should all be operating at the same time. Let's begin. There's a positive intention motivating every behavior, and a context in which every behavior has value. What this means is that everybody is doing the best they can, given their background and experience and knowledge that they have at the time. With very few exceptions, for example, hardened criminals and sociopaths, we all want to do the best we can and support other people. The positive worth of the individual is held constant, while the value and appropriateness of internal and/or external behavior is questioned. How this is used in a coaching session is to provide support for the individual, but examine other ways in which they can change their behavior to achieve their desired goals. Feedback versus failure. NLP says there's no such thing as failure. All results and behaviors are achievements, whether they meet the desired outcome for a given task or context or not. Hence, there's no such thing as failure, only incremental learnings to take us to the next step towards achieving our goal. The ability to change the process by which we experience reality is often more valuable than changing the content of our experience of it. Hence, having behavioral flexibility will allow the client to try out different ways of acting, reacting, and interacting. Having behavioral flexibility is also key, since it allows the coach to use different techniques, language styles, and modalities, whatever it takes to assist the client to experience the outcomes they want to achieve. The resources an individual needs in order to effect a change are already within them. This is one of the most fundamental presuppositions of NLP and coaching. The role of the coach is to help the client discover what is inside them, the answers, what they already know or believe, but may be afraid to act upon or verbalize because of limiting beliefs or other barriers. The map is not the territory. What this means is that our view of the world is just that, our view, no one else's, because no one else has ever walked exactly in our shoes and never will. It's only ever an interpretation. The meaning of the communication is the response you get, another fundamental presupposition. If you're not getting the response you want from clients, look at how you're communicating with them and adjust your words or approach to suit their preferences, so they can start to understand what you're saying. This leads on to the next presupposition. All distinctions human beings are able to make concerning our environment and our behavior can be usefully represented through the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory senses. Hence, you need to identify what your client's preferred representational system is and match it to gain better communication with him or her and move them forward. All of these presuppositions will come into play as you conduct your coaching sessions. This is another important slide and critical to your understanding of NLP and how you'll operate in a coaching situation. It's about the principles and practices of NLP and speaks to the fundamentals of how you view other people, who they are, what they do, and how they do it. One thing you can be sure of as a coach is that you'll encounter clients who'll challenge your view of the world and how people should operate. You need to be able to separate your views from that of your client so that you can do the following. Respect the other person's model of the world. It's their view, their reality based on their background and experiences, so make no judgments. You need to be able to identify their representational preferences, which may be different from yours, so as to influence and lead them as the coaching progresses. You need to be able to convey to the client that you're there to help them, but at the end of the day, they're in charge of their mind and therefore their results. It's up to them. You'll help and support them, but you won't do it for them. All techniques you use as a coach should increase choice. Your role is to open up the conversation so that clients discover new insights and awareness about themselves. Resistance is merely a sign of a lack of rapport. What this means is that if the coaching doesn't seem to be getting anywhere, you need to go back and check that you've developed the appropriate level of rapport with the client to enable trust to flow. We talked before about representational systems and preferences. Well, here they are. We view the world through these means: visual, what we see; auditory, what we hear; kinesthetic, what we feel; olfactory, what we smell; and gustatory, what we taste. We all have a primary representational system or preference, and a secondary one. Identifying the client's representational preferences enables the coach to match their modality and hence better influence them during the coaching session. How you do that is covered in the unit in more detail. There's an enormous amount of information coming to us at any one point in time, estimated to be about 2 billion bits of information every second. In order to make sense of all this, and not get overwhelmed by it, we need to be able to filter out what's important so that we can make sense of it. Our autonomic system is not able to absorb the 2 billion bits, so according to our preferred representational system, we experience just 132 bits of information. We see in images, so we create an internal representation of what's going on at the time. It's believed that at any one time, we can take in 7 bits of information, plus or minus 2. That is 5 up to 9 bits of information, depending on our mental capability, external interferences, etc. How we make sense of it all is by performing 3 sets of operations. We delete some of it as irrelevant, unimportant, not useful. We manipulate the information we do take in so that we can make sense of it. We do this by putting it into our own mental framework, which is based on our background and experiences. In this way, we actually distort the information so that it's not exactly the same as the information we received, but our distortion of it. Remember, the map is not the territory. We also take our distorted view of the information and fit it into what we already know and can associate with. Hence, we try to generalize the information so we can work with it later, remember it, or tell it to a friend. So, you can see that what and how we communicate is not as simple as it seems. Communication is a very complex process. Hence, it's no wonder that people miscommunicate a lot of the time. It takes time and perseverance to truly listen to a person and understand exactly what they're saying from their view of the world, and making sure we do not put our views on the client. This is a visual representation of what we've just discussed. The diagram shows how we take in information from an external event, delete, distort, and generalize it through our filters of time, space, energy, matter, language, memories, metaprograms, values, beliefs, and attitudes, then form an internal representation of what was said, which gives us our state. And it is our state that affects our physiology and propels us to behave in a certain way. Did you ever think all this was going on when you spoke to someone? What is happening during this process is that we're attempting to apply meaning to other people's communication, behaviors, and actions in order to make sense of it. However, because the meanings we ascribe to the world around us, and our understanding of it, are generated from within, we project ourselves onto our world. We see things not as they are, but as we are. Therefore, as coaches, we need to resist our natural inbuilt inclination to see the world as we do, suspend our own beliefs and attitudes for even a short while, and try instead to see the world as it is, or as others see it. So, how can we better relate to others so that we can better understand them and their view of the world? It's by building rapport. Rapport is a state of mutual trust and responsiveness between individuals or groups of people. It's about being in sync, being on the same wavelength, and having commonality of perspective. Research has shown that there are 3 important elements of any communication: the words that we use, the tone of voice, and our body language. All 3 have to be congruent for genuine communication to occur. Moreover, look at these percentages to show you how important body language is. So as a coach, you see it's vitally important that you mean what you say, and that your body language supports your tone. the specific words you're using don't have as big an impact, since they equate to only 7% of the communication. When it comes to making better use of our body language to develop better rapport with a client, there are two main ways to do this. These techniques are called matching and mirroring. Matching is when we match what the client is doing. That is, if he raises his right hand, the coach raises his right hand too. Mirroring is the opposite. The coach raises his left hand. When these techniques are done subtly and subconsciously, as you'll learn to do, a deeper state of trust develops between you and the client, which then opens up genuine communication. Do you think these two guys are matching or mirroring? Why do you think this? What about these two, matching or mirroring? Why? What else do you notice? What about these two, matching or mirroring? Why? Do you think they've established good rapport? We looked before at the ways we use our senses to take in information from the world. Most people are either visual, that's the majority of the population, with auditory or kinesthetic as their secondary preference. Your task as a coach is to discover the primary and secondary preferences of your clients so you can develop better rapport with them and then better influence them. And of course, we all have auditory digital, the things that we say to ourselves. It's useful to explore this preference with people who have limiting beliefs which stop them from getting on with their life. Here's one way you can identify a client's primary representational system. Listen to the words they use. If their representational preference is visual, they'll use words like, "That looks good to me." "Let's get a bird's eye view. Look at the big picture first, and then we can focus in on the details." "He was a sight for sore eyes." The clarity of his presentation style revealed brilliant insight and really cleared the fog. If their representational preference is auditory, they'll use words like, "That sounds great. It's music to my ears." "Lend me your ear for a moment, and I'm sure what I have to say will really resonate with you." Take a moment to really tune in to the words I'm using, and you'll get the ideal loud and clear. If their representational preference is kinesthetic, they'll use words like, "It's been a pretty bumpy ride, but now I feel that I've finally made it. Just the thought of it makes the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. This should go smooth and steady, like a walk in the park. I really want to get a handle on this and ensure I've grasped the concepts." If their representational preference is auditory digital, they'll use words like, "If you could just describe it in a little more detail, I'm sure I could make sense of it. I need to process what we just experienced in order to fully make sense of it." If you're sensitive to the changes in another person, you'll gain a distinct appreciation of their individual thought processes. Keep in mind, this isn't a foolproof method for identifying a person's representational preference, but it will give you a good guide to begin with. Here's another way to tell which representational preference a person is accessing. You notice the direction in which their eyes move when you ask them a question. If you were to ask a question that requires a visual response, their eyes would look upwards. For example, "What color is your bedroom?" They would look up and to the left if they were remembering. But if they were thinking about a new color scheme for their bedroom, they would be creating a future vision and would look up and to the right. If you asked them a question that required an auditory response, their eyes would look to the left or right, depending on if they were remembering, to the left, or creating a future, to the right. For example, "What's the first sound you hear in the morning when you wake up?" They would look to the left, remembering. Or if you asked them, "What if your dog could talk? What would he say to you?" They would look to the right, creating a future. Looking down and to the left is about remembering feelings. Looking to the right is about imaging how things would feel in the future. You might like to go back to some of the matching and mirroring pictures in the previous slides to see where these people are looking. This will give you some additional insights into what's going on between the two of them. Sensory acuity is about using our senses to increase and enhance our awareness of the information provided to us. Sensory acuity helps us to make finer distinctions in the information we're provided. For example, when you're coaching with a client, you should always be watching for subtle physiological shifts, for example, a blushing or flushing of the skin. This usually indicates something deeper going on, often an emotional issue that's core to who they are and how they relate to others in the world. If they give you permission, you can use this information to probe deeper. You may notice their breathing changes or subtle shifts in their body, if you're in person, or sounds in their voice, if you're coaching over the phone. Submodalities are the finer distinctions that we make in relation to particularly the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic modalities. Understanding modalities and how they work is useful when asking people to describe what's happening for them right now, what's happened to them in the past, and especially when you're working with them to create their desired future. For example, a client might be describing an incident in which he thought he had no control over the situation. You ask him to describe who's there, what's happening, what he sees, says, and does, and what others say and do. Then you use submodalities to turn down or turn off the undesirable parts and to turn up or turn on the desirable parts. You ask questions about the visual aspects in terms of their size, shape, color, focus, distance, movement, and luminosity. This recreates the scene. You then ask questions about what's being said and by whom. For example, are the words loud or soft, near or far, moving or still, coming from what direction, etc. Then you check out how things feel, kinesthetic questions about touch, texture, temperature, pressure, weight, speed, etc. Exploring the situation using all your senses brings the situation alive, so it can be dealt with in a different way. Using this technique, you can also create a whole new future about how they would like things to be. Now we come to learning 12 specific NLP techniques you can use to help you work with your clients. But firstly, a word about how you might be feeling right now. You might be feeling that all this is totally out of your league. You'll never understand it all, and you'll never be able to use NLP in a way that comes across as genuine. Well, let me tell you that's perfectly normal for this stage of your learning. You're actually at stage 1, the unconscious incompetence stage, where you don't know what you don't know. However, as you read through your workbook, you'll enter stage 2, the conscious incompetence stage, where you'll start to understand what you don't know. After that, you'll move to stage 3, conscious competence, where you'll know what you know, but not feel confident yet until you practice the techniques a little more. Then, after a period of time, you'll enter stage 4, the unconscious competence stage, where you don't know what you know, and you just use the NLP techniques automatically. You'll get to this point, so don't worry. It's all new at the moment, but in a few weeks of study, you'll be feeling a lot more comfortable. This is a technique you can use when your client has a problem with, for example, overeating. People come to you wanting support to do what they know they must do, but can't find the motivation to do. For example, stick to their diet or exercise regime. Here's a way to help them reframe their thoughts and curb their desires. Ask them to think of a substance that they like, for example, cheesecake. Then elicit the submodalities of the cheesecake. For example, it's a big slice of lemon cheesecake with lots of cream, really smooth texture that just melts in your mouth. Note any unconscious changes in their physiology as they talk, such as blushing of their skin, excitement in the voice, quick breathing, or changes in muscle tone. These will come in useful for testing purposes. Break their state and clear the visual screen by asking them, for example, if they smell toast. Or you could ask them to think about what was the last thing they did before going to bed last night. Then ask them to think of a substance they really dislike. The more intense, the better. For example, spinach. Elicit the submodalities of spinach. For example, it's slimy. A gross green color sticks to the roof of your mouth when you eat it. Again, note any changes in physiology. Break the state as before. Whatever the client chooses, this technique works better when the substance they really like and the substance they detest are similar in texture and color. For example, red wine and cough syrup. Clear the screen. Break the state as you did before. Then ask them to think of the cheesecake again, but substitute the dislike for the like by mapping the contrasting submodalities from one to the other. For example, ask them to picture the cheesecake a slimy, gross green color that sticks to the roof of their mouth whenever they eat it. Clear the screen. Test. Get them to tell you how they feel about eating cheesecake now. They should report a completely different feeling about eating cheesecake. Repeat this procedure a few times till they get the full effects of the substitution. Future pace to a day, a week, a year's time, and have them imagine a time in the future when they are offered to eat cheesecake. Ask them to tell you what comes to mind. The response should be of a slimy, gross green color thing that sticks to the roof of their mouth whenever they eat it. They dislike it intensely. We've just used a strategy called future pacing that encourages the client to step forward into a future time and associate into that future scenario visually, auditorily, and kinesthetically. As a coach, you can use this strategy with any change that the client makes, testing that the change will hold into the future. It's very important to do this so that the client is fully prepared when things don't go their way and they're on the verge of a potential relapse into old habits. You should prepare them for different events that might tempt them back into old habits. For example, a birthday party, coffee with friends, a wedding celebration, after dinner with the family, etc. Stepping forward into all these scenarios and time frames is a great way to prepare them to stay strong to their newfound dislike. This slide and the two that follow are all about helping the client meet requests from other people while at the same time doing this in a way and in a time frame that suits them. The first approach is called the agreement frame. This is a linguistic tool that coaches can use to verbally pace the person communicating with and then lead them to where we want the communication to go. The agreement frame takes one of the following forms. I agree with whatever you're saying, and I'd like to, for example, do this way instead. I appreciate what you're doing for me or someone else, and, for example, I'd like to suggest another way. I respect, for example, your point of view, and I'd like you to consider another perspective. Here are some examples. A says, I've got so much work to do to complete this project. We're going to have to work late to get everything finished on time. B says, I agree we have a lot to do, and I think that if we go home now and recharge our batteries, we'll finish the job in half the time tomorrow. Hence, the aim of this exchange is to deliver on what's requested in a way that meets the needs as well. Try this out at home with your kids. The purpose frame is a linguistic tool which we can use to satisfy the purpose of a person's request without necessarily giving them what they actually ask for. For example, the Eskimo asks his boss for underfloor heating in his igloo office. The boss replies, Underfloor heating? For what purpose? The Eskimo responds, So I can have nice warm feet. The boss replies, Okay, I'll supply you with some extra thick socks. This is a neat reframe of the request in a way that both people win. The what-if frame, also known as the as-if frame, is used to negotiate resistance and limiting beliefs by assisting a person to consider more fully those possibilities, options, and ideas which they may have previously considered beyond the scope of their abilities or the realms of possibility. This is an extremely useful approach to use when your client is stuck and can't seem to move forward, probably because of some past event or limiting belief. You don't delve into what's holding them back. You simply ask them to imagine what would happen if they could get past this obstacle. For example, your friend says, "I could never get that promotion. I just don't have what it takes." You respond, "Well, what would happen if you did get the promotion? If you had it now, what would it look like? How different would things be for you?" You can see how this takes your client into a whole different mindset of what could be possible. If they're fully engaged with this vision, rather than focusing on the blockage, and you can help them do this using all their senses, they'll start goal setting on their desired future and taking actions to make it happen. Another technique you will find that works with all populations, and especially with children, is called positivity. Say it the way you want it. Master communicators tailor their communication to suit the person they're communicating with in a number of different and subtle ways. One key aspect of this process is the recognition that the unconscious mind cannot process a negative, or in other words, we can't think about what we don't want to think about without thinking about it. For example, if I ask you not to think about an elephant in the room, where does your mind immediately go? To the elephant. If I say to you, "Don't open that drawer," your mind immediately goes to finding ways to open the drawer. If I ask you not to mention the war, you almost immediately want to ask questions about the war. So instead of saying to a child, "Don't spill your drink," consider putting a positive spin on all your communications with them, such as praising everything they do. "That's right, carry the drink just like that, nice and carefully." In other words, always focus on what's right rather than what's wrong. The mind will then go in positive directions. Here's a technique that coaches can use when you encounter clients who don't want to do anything different or don't believe they need to make any changes in their life. Negatives, when used well, can be useful and are often more elegant and subtly influential in achieving the same results as saying it positively, with little or no resistance from the person we're communicating with. You can use this technique especially when the client is a person who hasn't responded to any of your approaches and is someone whom you know likes a challenge. So, for example, if your client has not been passing their exams and you think it's highly likely this will happen again in the forthcoming exam, rather than focusing on their study schedule, you might simply say to them, "This test is going to be difficult, but just try to focus and do your best." Or, "While I wouldn't suggest this test will be easy, I know you've studied hard and have all the knowledge to do well." This approach sets up a challenge for them, which they won't be able to resist, while still remaining a positive coaching approach. Using ambiguity is a technique that coaches use when they want to influence another person's thinking. Direct communication might be construed as telling clients what to do, and may lead to resistance. Instead, you might ask or suggest an outcome that you desire. The client can choose to accept or reject the suggestion. For example, you might say, "It would be ever so useful if you wouldn't mind, for example, helping me unload the groceries from the car." Or, "Perhaps you might like to consider, for example, studying in your room where you won't be distracted by the TV." In this way, you're not really asking or telling them what to do, but making a suggestion that they might like to consider. The important thing is that they can choose whether to go along with your suggestion or not. In this way, the consequences of their actions are up to them. For example, in the latter scenario, they may or may not pass their exams, and that's up to them. They retain total control of the situation. This is another technique that coaches can use when they want to make a point, but make it subtly rather than via direct communication. It's called speaking in quotes. Usually, when we want to communicate clearly and effectively, we tend to be very direct. By doing that and being explicit in our communication, we leave the other person without any doubt about what we want them to do, and how we want them to do it. However, one drawback to this approach is that it can trigger resistance. The other person may not want to do what we ask, or they may not want to do what we ask, or they may not want to do it exactly how we want them to do it. Hence, we can speak to them in quotes. For example, if someone asks you to do something in a certain way when you would prefer to do it otherwise, you can respond by saying, "Many roads lead to Rome." If a client wants to run away from their present problems and start all over again, you might ask them if they think the grass is greener on the other side. If a client wants to forget a certain incident with a supposed friend without examining his part in the interaction, you might ask him if he believes in water under the bridge. Using quotes as analogies for how a client is behaving or responding to certain situations can prompt discussion, as if you were both talking about a third person, someone distinct from the client to whom the conversation applies. The client will then be able to subconsciously take on the learnings himself in a secure way, and hopefully act appropriately. Here's another technique that speaks to the heart of assumptions. Remember assumptions? Those things that can make an ass out of you and me? A mind read is just that. We assume we know what the other person is saying, when in fact it's our own thoughts that are interfering with the communication. A presupposition, on the other hand, is the conclusion we come to based on the facts of the matter. Given the facts, what is logical to suppose is actually happening? Let's look at the statement here. The statement is, "I don't see why I can't do it. All my friends are doing it." What are the actual facts of the matter? He feels that he's been treated unfairly? Or he wants to be liked by his friends? Or this person's friends do something he currently does not do? Only the last one is factual. Points 1 and 2 are mind reads. They're not mentioned or implied in any way in the original statement. Point 3 could also be contentious. It could be a presupposition, and it could also be a mind read, insofar as he states in the sentence that all his friends are doing it, whatever it is. It's a presupposition. However, on the other hand, we cannot ascertain whether his belief that all his friends are doing it is based on fact. Therefore, they may not be doing it at all, and it may actually be a mind read on his part. As you can see, there are various levels of complexity in any communication. As a coach, you need to have developed sufficient rapport with your client so you can delve deeper when necessary to make sure you're getting all the facts and your client is not drawing conclusions or assumptions that are simply not true. The hierarchy of ideas is a particularly useful technique based on looking for the intention or purpose of the request or statement. As coaches, we can work with the client to chunk up, chunk down, or chunk sideways. Often in one conversation, we'll do all three. Let's look at how each of these three strategies are used. Chunking up is used when you want to gain agreement on the bigger picture. It's particularly useful when the client is confused about which way to go, what to do, how to resolve the dispute, etc. You ask the client, "For what purpose? What's your intention?" For example, in a dispute, if the intention is to resolve the situation amicably rather than going head to head, the way to achieve a win-win solution will have to change. Chunking down gets to the detail of the situation. You ask your client for examples of the behavior. What is the effect on yourself and others of this behavior? How specifically does it impact? As a coach, you keep asking for more detail until the situation is fully explored. Chunking down is typically used at the beginning of the conversation before you chunk up to identify the purpose or intention and work out how the situation can be resolved. Chunking sideways is used to explore other opportunities beyond those that seem presently available. Here's an example of how you would use all three approaches. A client wants to buy a new car, but is unsure of what to buy. You discuss the kind of car they have in mind, chunking down, and they say, a Ford hatchback with sporty wheels. You then ask them what they will use the car for, chunking up, and they say, to take the family camping on weekends. You then ask them if they've considered another type of vehicle, such as a four-wheel drive, chunking sideways. As a general rule, communication tends to flow better and be more useful when all of the people involved are using similar-sized chunks from the same hierarchical level. This is also one of the reasons why the person controlling the level of abstraction also controls the communication. Typically, this person is the coach, who asks the right questions to direct the conversation where it needs to go. The final technique we'll look at is anchoring. Anchoring is based on the concepts of the condition response and stimulus response theory. Anchoring is the process by which, when we associate a desired response or state with a unique stimulus a number of times, the two become linked in such a way that when the same stimulus is applied later on, the associated response or state will occur naturally and automatically. For example, have you ever been on holiday and observed a fabulous sunset, a sunset that was just magical and takes your breath away? Well, I have. I remember exactly where I was, who I was with, where we were, what I was eating and drinking at the time. It was an event that's fixed in my mind forever as a very positive experience. I tend to remember it when I get stressed, as a way of de-stressing myself, going back to the peaceful, vibrant scene in my mind and calming myself down. As a way of getting in touch with that scene, I have it anchored on my left arm on the inside just above my wrist. Whenever I touch that spot, it takes me there in an instant to my beautiful sunset. I immediately de-stress and become calm again. This is how anchoring works. As a coach, you ask the client to link the mind picture or experience to a part of their body that when they touch there, immediately brings back that memory. This technique is especially useful when you're working with a client helping them envisage their desired future. Touching that spot where they anchored the vision will immediately bring them back on track to achieve their goal. Anchoring can provide a simple, effective way to switch yourself and others quickly into useful and resourceful states whenever you choose to. That was the last of the 12 NLP techniques that we recommend you use as a coach to help your clients move forward and achieve their dreams. If you'd like to know more about NLP training courses and programs, get in touch with us and we'll explore the possibilities with you. In the next unit, you'll learn about the fundamentals of coaching and how you can coach ethically and responsibly.